Okay, let's get started with Chapter 24 for Section 4. This will be on inflation. So what is inflation? Inflation is a continual rise in the price level. So when we talk about prices, we talk about overall prices. On average, what are overall prices doing? All right, we talk about this in terms of an aggregate or a price aggregate. Inflation is the growth rate of that aggregate price level, or taking all goods and the services within the economy together. How is that overall price coming? All right. Deflation is, well, the opposite of inflation. It's actually a continual fall in price level or a negative growth rate. You could think of deflation as negative inflation. And if you think that's confusing, think about it this. We also have a term called disinflation, which is actually just a reduction in the inflation rate. So inflation and deflation are measured with changes in some kind of a price index. Now, what an index number does is it tries to measure overall movements within statistics. So it summarizes a lot of information into a single statistical number or index number. So price index is a number that summarizes what happens to a weighted composite of prices of a selection of goods over time. All right, you can say, so a price index is essentially a fancy weighted average of price level, where the weights on each price are going to have something to do with the budget share, how big a percentage of your budget each one of those goods are in some way or another. Now, there's lots of different price indices, and we won't talk about different index number theory, but you can think of this as a good basic definition for what we're talking about. So, well, how do we create a price index? Well, there's really two stages. The first stage is we have to have what's called a basket of goods. So what is going to go into our price index? And there's a lot of theory behind what makes sense to put into a price index. And frankly, I don't want to go into it because, one, it's complicated, and two, well, we don't really know how to do it yet. We don't have a good econometric test, and econometrics is just statistics for economics, to determine whether or not a grouping of goods is the right grouping to put together, or if it makes any sense whatsoever to put them together. So, in any event, we've got this basket of goods. So for right now, we're just going to assume that we have the basket of goods set up right. Usually the way we think of it is in terms of substitute goods. So we group together close substitutes. Then we need the prices. And then we determine total expenditure. So essentially, when we're using a really basic price index, what we're concerned with is how much does it cost to buy this basket of goods in 1 year compared to how much it costs to buy the basket of goods, the same basket of goods, in a following year. So in this case, we look at the prices and we hold quantities constant. We look at prices in 2009. It takes $540 to buy this basket of goods in 2009. It takes $675 to buy the same basket in 2010. So if we take the ratio of those two expenditures, all right, multiply it by 100, we get a price index of 125. Now the way what that means is that the price level in 2010 is 125% of the price level in 2009, or prices went up by 25%. Or you can think of that as the inflation rate was 25%, which would be pretty daggum high, actually. At least for the U.S. it would be. So if you want to know more about how to actually calculate these indices, then take intermediate macroeconomics. I go through and we do some exercises in calculating some of the index numbers. For right now, we're going to call it good that you know what an index number is and that you know that the inflation rate is the growth rate of this index number. So it's the percentage change. So in the base year, it'd be 540 divided by 540 times 100, which would be 100. All right, an index number is always equal to 100 in the base year. Okay, it's 125 in the next year, so we take the percentage change. So 125, that's what it is in 2010, minus 100, that's what it is in 2009, right? 2009, all over 100 because that was the value in 2009. So basic formula, final minus initial over initial, right? Final value minus your initial value divided by your initial value gives you percentage change, and in this case, it's 25%. So some real world price indices. GDP deflator. All right, GDP deflator basically uses all of the goods within GDP, so all final goods and services produced within the economy, as its basket of goods. Now, there's a couple of cool things about the GDP deflator. One is that it's a chain-weighted price index. Now, I'm not going to go into the difference between a chain-weighted and fixed-weighted price index in this class. Take intermediate macro, and I will. But the nice thing about a chain-weighted index is that the growth rate or the inflation rate is independent of the base year. In all the other index numbers, it's going to change when you change the base year. That's the year that you call 100, all right, the foundation year. GDP deflator won't do that. All right, the level will change, but the growth rate won't. The consumer price index, this is a fixed weight index number. It has a fixed basket of consumer goods. So it's not quite as good as GDP deflator. But it's also, it's been around and used for quite some time. This is my favorite one if you're talking about consumption goods. It's the Personal Consumption Expenditure Deflator, PCE. Is measured a price in goods of consumers, but it uses the same chain-weighted methodology that GDP deflator does. So it's basically like CPI, only better. So this is my favorite index for consumer prices. There's also the Producer Price Index. This uses the same methodology that CPI uses, the Consumer Price Index, only this is looking at goods that manufacturers, that businesses would use, so producers would use. So you could also call this the Wholesale Price Index, it gets called sometimes, or at least it used to. All right, these are intermediate goods. So if we take a breakdown of CPI, which is the most common one, so if you hear a statistic about inflation on the news, let's say, that's going to be talking about CPI more than likely. You can kind of see how it breaks down, transportation, medical. Notice how big a chunk housing is, right? Education. Education has been a big source of inflation over the last few years. Cost of education's really gone up. We've seen kind of a contraction in housing costs over the last couple of 3 years, which has helped keep our inflation rate pretty low. So we've got a concept of price level. Let's do something with it. So we got this real versus nominal stuff. All right, nominal output is total amount of goods and services produced measured at current prices, or we could say in current dollars. So if I go back right here, what is the total value, nominal value of this basket of goods that we were talking about before? Well, in 2009, it's $540. In 2010, it's $675. But you say, well, wait a minute. It's still the same basket. It's 10 pairs of jeans, 12 pairs of flannel shirts, 100 pounds of apples, and 80 pounds of oranges. All right? It can't be worth more. It's the same stuff. Well, actually, it could be worth more if for some reason we changed our value structure. But let's assume everything stays the same. A pair of jeans is a pair of jeans. Apples are apples, and you like them just as much in 2009 as you do in 2010. Nothing's different. Well, what's changed? Prices have changed. So now we start to see the problem with nominal values. Nominal values, you can see growth in this, all right? So the total value of this basket increased in nominal terms, but did it in real terms? Did we actually have more stuff? The answer is no. So how do we deal with that? Well, that's measured in current prices. That can cause some problems. Real output is the amount of goods and service produced adjusted for that change in price level. So we can adjust for the change in price level. One way we could do that is we could hold prices fixed. So if we held prices fixed, I know I'm bouncing around a bit, for this good at 2009 level, what would they be worth in 2010? Exactly the same as they were in 2009, right? Why? Because the basket of goods didn't change. All right, what changed? The price changed. So real adjusts for those changes in price level. So generally speaking, real output equals nominal divided by the price index. So a good rule of thumb is if you have a nominal value, divide it by aggregate price level, and you get real. Oh yeah, and you should also multiply by 100. So remember this formula. This will be important for you. So expected and unexpected inflation affects behavior differently. Okay, so one of the big things that you learn in economics is that what actually happens is not really that important. What becomes really important is what we expect to happen. And there's this very, very simple reason for that. When we make our decisions, we don't know what is going to actually happen. We only know what we expect to happen. So, for example, I decide to buy a car. All right, so I go out and I buy a car, and I decide I'm going to buy the car today because I expect interest rates, all right, say the interest rates on car loans, to go up tomorrow. And so I don't want to end up paying more interest rates or more interest on the car loan than I have to, so I decide it's best for me to buy it now. Okay, so I get my car loan, I do all this stuff. But then interest rates don't go up. Let's say they go down. Well, but wait a minute. Which was more important to my decision? My expectations that interest rates were going to go up, or the fact that they actually went down? Well, actually my expectations, because I didn't know they were going to go down when I bought the car. Right? So expectations of variables is often much, much more important in determining economic behavior than what actually happens. Now, if we expect inflation, then we can plan for it. And there's lots of ways we can plan for it. For one thing, you might minimize the amount of cash you hold, because inflation robs the value of cash. All right, cash money is basically this leaky bucket for holding value. All right, and the leaks in the bucket are inflation. So as we have more inflation, our value of our cash goes down. So what might I do? I might hold it in a savings account that yields some interest to insulate myself from some of this inflation. Expected inflation is, of course, inflation people expect to incur so they can plan for it. Unexpected inflation is a surprise, so people don't plan for it. And the basic difference is if you can't plan for it, it's going to cost you more than if you can. So expectations of inflation play an important role in any ongoing inflation. In fact, we can think of these expectations as actually able to accelerate or cause some inflation. So we have inflation that causes us to expect inflation, which can actually lead to more inflation. All right, we talk about inflation having inertia in that way. So an example of how this might be, okay, I expect the price of toilet paper to go up. So I go out to the store and I buy lots of toilet paper. So now there's lots more demand for toilet paper, which pushes the price of toilet paper up, which causes, well, the price of toilet paper to go up, right? So that is a type of inflation, at least within one good of toilet paper, right? So, well, we can think of this whole thing as the entire economy having similar kinds of actions like this. So we have to be careful about this, how expectations work within that. So what are some of the costs of inflation? Well, inflation may not make a nation, well, let's see. One thing it can do is it can redistribute income from those who do not raise their prices to those who do. Okay, so what do we mean by it may not make the inflation poor? The inflation may not make the nation poorer. is that we may have the same amount of goods. So if we go back to the slide where we had the basket of goods in 2009, 2010, the basket didn't change. So we still had that same amount of stuff. But we did have inflation. Now, well, what happens if we have one set of goods where the sellers can easily raise the price, but another set of goods where the sellers can't really raise the price at all? Well, what's going to happen? Well, the ones who can't raise the price at all are going to end up getting a lower real price, okay, less actual goods, right, purchasing power for their goods. And those who can raise their price are going to get more. And so we have this weird redistribution of income. It can reduce the amount of information that prices convey. Well, we saw that in that first example, right? We can't directly compare this total expenditure in 2009 to 2010 because the prices changed. So the information that prices contained was pretty good within one time period, but when we go across time periods, so to more than one time period, we find, well, the problem with inflation is that it really degrades the amount of information that we have in price, that we can find in prices. Inflation is a very serious problem if it increases to what we call a hyperinflation, where inflation hits triple digits, 100% or more. A better way of thinking about this is an explosion in price level. Okay, so I think a good rule or a good definition of hyperinflation is any inflation rate over 50% annually. All right, but generally what happens is that it doesn't really matter whether we talk about it being 50% or 100% inflation rate, is that it's gotten so high that it just builds on itself and actually ends up exploding. So it just keeps going up and up. The inflation rate just keeps going up and up and up and up and up and up, and it just kind of never stops, right? And it can go to the point where the monetary system, money, just becomes absolutely worthless, and we almost will go back to a barter type system. So if you want more information about this, there's a great little article right here that you should take a look at.